Good morning, Momentum. How you doing? So, is Shannon still here? Does anybody know what ACH stands for? Oh, there we go. There we go. My finance peeps in the house. So, so that's right. Only 25-cent charge for ACH, but as opposed to, I'm the finance guy here at Momentum, so I know all this. The average cost for a credit card giving is like 3%. So, anyway. That's my plug for ACH giving as well. But anyway, my name is Jason Peterson. I'm so glad to be here on stage this morning talking to you all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the finance guy at Momentum. But also, I have a lovely wife over here, Leah Peterson. I have 3 awesome kids, Lindsay, Evan, and Olivia, 16, 14, 10 years old. They keep switching on me, so I always have to think about it. But anyway, amazing family. And a little background on us. Leah and myself and Lindsay, when she was 4 months old, 16 years ago next month, came here to Cleveland from Northern Virginia to help start this church. And we were on the launch team, and so now we've been involved with Momentum since the very beginning for 16 years, and it has been an awesome ride. It really has been. Now, I want to come at you at a different perspective here, being a finance guy. Is that I obviously know about offerings here at Momentum and how, what levels they're at. And the reason I bring this up is because what's amazed me over 16 years here at Momentum Christian Church is that when Momentum goes through a valley, and every church in America or around the world goes through a valley of some sort, right? We're going through the pandemic right now. That's a valley. Every Fortune 500 company out there, every small mom and pop shop, every relationship, every person goes through peaks and valleys. And one of the things, being trained in finance, and that's what I do for a living, I'm in corporate finance, whenever we go through a valley like a pandemic, for example, you always worry about sales, right? Are we going to get enough revenue to be able to make it through? And being the finance guy here, I always worry, like, oh my gosh, we're in a pandemic. Are we going to be able to make it through having good offerings through such a valley? And what I can say is, we've never had to worry about money here at Momentum. And this is not a budgeting conversation that I'm having with you. It sounds like it is because I'm throwing out dollars and cents and ACH giving and credit card fees and stuff like that. This is a faith conversation. I truly believe that you can take a look at offerings at a church, especially a small church, and gauge the faithfulness of the congregation through those offerings. You guys are trusting God in every area of your life, including your finances, and I know it's not easy. And because of that, Momentum has never had to worry about money. So I just wanted to throw that out there, totally different angle. Thank you very much for having that sort of relationship with God. So I'm really up here, though, this morning to tell you a story. It's a story that I read. I was scrolling through my news feed one day about a year ago, and the story really kind of hit home because it had to do with a guy named Danny Anderson. He was a country boy, lived in the country, not sure what state or anything. The article didn't talk about that. But what resonated with me was that Danny was not a Christian. He didn't believe in God. And the article, what it did is it chronicled how he went from not being a believer to getting baptized. And that resonated with me because I was not a believer. I mean, I said that we came to Cleveland, my wife and I and Lindsay, 16 years ago. It wasn't long before that I was not a Christian. I didn't believe. It's not that I was atheist. I didn't think about it, right? And that was similar to Danny in the story. He was not a believer. And so I went ahead and read the story. Now, it didn't totally parallel my life because he's a country boy. He's out in the country. I was not a country boy. But Danny, like I said, lived in the country. And in my simple mind, I'll give you a little glimpse into Jason Peterson's mind. There's got to be a rooster out of his window, right? Like on a fence post that wakes him up every single morning. He gets out of bed, he throws on, it has to be a flannel shirt and jeans and cowboy boots and a hat, and he runs downstairs and he grabs some bacon and he goes out into the field and starts to do his chores or whatever. That's not what the article said, but that in my mind, that's what I'm thinking. But but one of the things that he has to do is he has to drive one of those big tractors, like one of those big tractors that have rear wheels that are like as tall as I am. And now again, into my simple mind we go. When I think of the country and tractors like that and young men riding tractors like that, I think of a movie that came out in the 1980s. Anybody know what those movie is? Huh? No. There you go. Footloose. Kevin Bacon, city boy, comes to the country, has a chicken fight with tough guy, country boy. They're fighting over a girl, and they have a chicken fight on a couple of tractors. Anyway, if you haven't seen that movie, you got to see it. And if you haven't seen it, and you come to me and you say, hey, I watched it, and you say you didn't feel like dancing afterwards, then I'm going to call you a liar. All right? So anyway, Footloose, great movie. So back to Danny. So Danny is on his tractor, and as many of you people know, whenever there's a young man in his 20s, he has like massive lapses in judgment, right? And so he was going through one of these lapses in judgment, and he's playing around on the tractor, and he flips his tractor, and it is not good, folks. I mean, literally, this enormous tractor rolls over on him. And the only saving grace here is that a neighbor who was working the fields next door heard it. And he turned and he saw it because it's a huge tractor. And he had the presence of mind to tell his wife, go dial 911 right now. And he runs over and he pulls Danny from out under the tractor. And this neighbor is interviewed later on in the article. And he said, when I pulled Danny out from under this tractor, I held him in my arms, and the first thing I thought was, oh my gosh, it looks like this kid just went through 10 rounds with Mike Tyson. And he said he was dying in my arms. Now, luckily, the ambulance got there in time and was able to get Danny to the hospital in time. His parents are going to the hospital. I mean, imagine that ride, right? Going to the hospital, you don't know if your son's going to be alive when you get there. Danny's in the hospital. He has like a team of like 4 or 5 surgeons working on him. I can't remember all the types of surgeons, but there's a general surgeon, there was a trauma surgeon, there was a brain surgeon, there was a plastic surgeon at some point in time. His face was like completely like crushed. And so they worked on him, and luckily he made it through. He had to spend a couple weeks in ICU. But his head doctor, when he realized that Danny was coherent enough to understand things, this doctor walked into Danny's hospital room and sat down next to Danny and talked to him. And I don't have the article here. I wish I did. I'd like to actually read how the author wrote this section of the article, because it was a great piece of writing. Because when you read it, you hung on every word the doctor said. You could feel the weight of the quietness of the hospital room as the doctor talked to him. And what he said to Danny was, listen, Danny, I've been doing this for a long time. And the article didn't say what age this doctor was, but you can insinuate that it was probably in the back quarter of his career, probably in his mid-50s, pushing 60 or something. And he said, Danny, I've been doing this for a long time. You are one of the luckiest, if not the luckiest patient I have ever had. He said that the tractor that flipped on top of you caused so much trauma to your head that you should have either very little brain activity or you should be dead. You probably should be dead. And then the doctor looked at him and said, there is somebody up there that is looking down on you. And when Danny was interviewed later in the article, he said, when the doctor said that to me, it wasn't just a saying. Some people just say that, someone's looking down on you, kind of everyday vernacular. Danny said, no, he meant it. He meant somebody was looking down on me. So Danny makes pretty much a full recovery. He has some memory issues that linger because of all the trauma that happened to his brain. But essentially he got totally better. He left the hospital, and fast forward a few years, Danny meets the woman of his dreams, this girl named Michelle. And Michelle's a country girl, and they fall in love. They date for a while. They fall in love. They get married. And him and Michelle move in together, and everything's great until the day that Michelle's horse dies. Now, background on Michelle, she grew up, like I said, in the country, but she loved riding horses, and she had a few horses growing up, and there was this one particular horse that she liked the best. It was the oldest horse that she had from being a little girl, and the horse died, and Michelle was absolutely devastated. And one of the first things she thought of when this horse died was that she wanted to go to church. She was drawn to church. Now, the article talked about Michelle's upbringing a little bit. She was not a churchgoer at the time, but she did have some exposure to church. Danny never had any exposure to church. Michelle had a little bit. But she was drawn to church. And when she was interviewed, she said, I wasn't a churchgoer, but I always thought I'd end up there, which I thought was an interesting quote. But anyway, so there was a neighbor that Michelle and Danny got to know over the first year or so of their marriage before the accident, or before the horse died. And that neighbor had asked Michelle to church a few times, and Michelle had always politely declined and said, no, thank you, maybe next time. But when this horse died, Michelle called up that neighbor and said, hey, next time you go to church, can I go? Can I tag along? And she said, absolutely. So they go off to church, and Michelle absolutely loved it. She comes home, she talks to Danny, says, Danny, you got to go to church. This church is great. They didn't detail what this church was like in the article, but through context, it seemed kind of Momentum-esque. You could kind of go as you are. You could wear jeans and a T-shirt and preachers and T-shirt. And so that was helpful for Danny. So Danny ended up going with her. And there were two preachers there. And those preachers really talked into Danny. They were younger preachers, and they were really good at being able to relate everyday stuff to the Bible in such a way that Danny connected with them, and he started growing a little bit. And so, as you all know, all you men, as you know, when women really get into something, they go 100% of the way. They never go halfway, right? And so Michelle was not just satisfied with Sunday morning. She now wanted to go to Bible study. And so Danny was like, okay, well, I'll go. He kind of resisted at first, but he went. But when he was interviewed in the article, Danny said, hey, there were two reasons really that I went to church with Michelle and why I went to this Bible study with her. Number one was that we were newlyweds, and the last thing I wanted to do was start the marriage off on the wrong foot and say no to her, right? I wanted to be supportive, even though I didn't really want to go. But number two, and equally as important, he said, was he never forgot that conversation that doctor had in that hospital room with him. He said he almost felt like he owed it to that doctor. And you know what? If there is a God, maybe I kind of owe it to God to show up to church. And so anyway, Michelle and Danny go to this Bible study. And it's great. And there's a Bible study leader there that pours into Danny. He gets to know Danny really well, and he pours into him. And that is the final hump that Danny needed to get over in order to get baptized. And he did. He got baptized. So it was a great story, right? Feel-good story. Danny almost dies in a field. And now, a year or two later, he's baptized and he's a Christian. Cool story. But what I want to do this morning is I want to go back through the story in some detail and look at the chain of events or the chain reaction that has to happen to get Danny from that field, not being a believer, to get baptized into the water, as I say. So the first thing that had to happen is Danny almost had to kill himself, right? He had to go through a life-altering, a life-changing event, and he almost killed himself in that field. But then Danny had to go to a specific hospital where there's a specific doctor that saved him, but then also cared enough and loved him enough to sit in a quiet hospital room and have a conversation with him about God, because that's what he did. He didn't go into the hospital room and say, hey, let me tell you how I saved you. He went to the hospital room to tell Danny that somebody loved him up there. That's what he did. And it's interesting to me because I think a lot of people, and I was one of these people a while ago, that thought doctors were very science-based. I mean, they are science-based, they have to be, but like that was it. Like they weren't religious at all. They didn't believe about, in God at all. It was all just very black and white. Not true with this doctor. And I actually have a little bit of experience with that because my dad was a surgeon, and he was a really, really good surgeon. And I get to say that because I have the mic and I get to brag on my dad. But he was awesome. But he was not a follower of Jesus. The only time he ever talked about God, and it was every day, but the only time he talked about God is when he took the Lord's name in vain, which he did several times a day. But I remember when I was young, I was probably about 10 years old, and I was driving in a car with him. I don't know how we got on the topic of God because we didn't talk about God, but I must have asked him, like, do you believe in God? And he turned to me and he said, Jason, you don't see the things I've seen on an operating table over the course of my career and not believe in God, which I thought was really cool. And then just to wrap up the story on my dad real quick, the last year of his life when he was 84, he found Jesus, which was awesome. But anyway, back to the story. So Danny almost had to kill himself. Danny had to go to this specific hospital, have a specific doctor who talked to him about heaven. Danny had to marry a specific girl in Michelle who happened to have a horse who died. There had to be a specific neighbor who had been inviting Michelle to church for a while, so that when Michelle went through this difficult time in her life, she had an easy conduit to church, right? Danny, this had to happen in a certain point in time. Danny was a newlywed. I think it might have had to happen when he was newlywed, when he was kind of hypersensitive to making sure that the marriage started off on the right foot, right? There had to be two preachers at this church that Michelle and Danny went to that spoke to Danny, kind of spoke his language. And there had to be a specific Bible study with a specific leader that cared enough to pour into Danny to get him baptized. Pretty phenomenal chain of events if you actually go back and dissect it, right? Now, I want to go back through the story and think about how many Christians were involved in getting Danny baptized. There was the doctor, number one, right? There was the neighbor, one of my favorite people in the story because the author doesn't talk a lot about the neighbor. But man, what an important piece of Danny's story was the neighbor. There were the two preachers, number 3 and 4. There was a small group leader that poured into Danny, and then you can argue that Michelle is the 6th one because even though she was kind of going along the journey with Danny, she was a few steps ahead of him. I didn't say this, but the article pointed out that she was baptized a little while before Danny was. But I definitely count Michelle as well. So that's six Christians that played a part in Danny's story. So what does that tell you? What's the lesson there? There's a couple. Number one, what's the saying? It takes a village to raise a kid. It takes a village to get somebody baptized sometimes too, right? For all you Christians sitting out there, I know not everybody's a Christian, but for all you Christians out there, what's the lesson? The lesson is you never know when you're the neighbor. If you're inviting people to church and they keep saying no, don't get discouraged, right? Keep doing it because you never know when their horse is going to die. Now, a lot of us have, all of us have stories, right, about being a Christian, what it took to become a Christian, and maybe some of them aren't as spectacular as Danny's, maybe some of them are, but they're all very important, right? And it's really important to learn your story. I remember when Leah and I were on the launch team, when we came here to help start Momentum, Dan had us learn our story, like learn how to tell it. And he did it in a couple different ways. He said, learn how to tell like a 5 or 10 minute version of your story, and learn how to tell like a 1 or 2 minute version of your story. Because you never know when you're going to meet somebody and be in a discussion with them, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the perfect time to tell my story. And then you whip out that 1 minute version. That's not too long. It keeps them interested, but it's impactful. So it's good to know your story and rehearse your story, but it's also not just good for other people, it's good for you too. I mean, I talked about peaks and valleys earlier, right? We all go through peaks and valleys, and sometimes those valleys are really, really crazy deep valleys. And let's not kid ourselves, everyone. Sometimes those valleys are laced with doubt. And sometimes there's no better antidote than just to remind yourself how you got here and all the chain of events that had to happen. Sometimes that's the perfect antidote. So I want to go ahead and turn to the Bible. If you all could open your Bibles or open your app, or it's going to be here on the screen as well. But I want to talk about the Great Commission. It's tough to say, hey, there's one part of the Bible that's more important than the other, but from my perspective, Jason Peterson speaking, the Great Commission is one of the most important parts of the New Testament, if not the most important part. And a little bit of background. So Jesus is crucified, and he's buried in a tomb in a cave. 3 days later, he rises, right? And so for the next 40 days, he actually spends time on earth as the risen Jesus, and he appears to various people. And right before he ascends to heaven to be at the right hand of the Father for eternity, he has his disciples. There's 11 now, not 12, right? Because one of them is the reason he got crucified. But there's 11 disciples. He says, meet me on a mountain in Galilee. And this is the scene that happens before he goes into heaven. And I always, when I read this, I'm just like, oh my gosh, what is he going to say? This is his parting words to his disciples that he poured into for a few years. What is he going to say before he goes up into heaven? It's got to be impactful, right? And I think about this, and I think about myself, and there's going to be a similar time very shortly, in about 2 years, where I'm going to have a similar sort of moment. So my oldest girl is 16 years old, and she's going to be going to college soon. And for those of you who don't know Lindsay, she is type A, folks. I don't know where I think she got it from my mom. I don't know, but she definitely did not get it from me or Leah. We are type B. And she loves doing stuff. In fact, she's going to Iceland this summer, and I think she just wanted to get out of the house for a little bit. And I'm like, dude, you don't have to go to Iceland, get out of the house. But anyway, I'm really excited for her. But if she ends up going to college in the continental United States, I'll be happy. She definitely won't be anywhere around here. She wants to go somewhere far away and experience life. But I imagine taking her to college, and I'm in her dorm room, I'm helping set up, and she's kind of shooing me out the door because she wants to get on with her life. And I'm like, listen, Lindsay, growing up, you stalled every night when you wanted to go to bed. I get to stall this one last time, right? So, but I'm going to have that 30-second window where I look into her eyes and I get to say one last thing. And I really want that to be impactful. And what am I going to say? I don't know yet. But it's got to be impactful. It's got to stay in her mind. It's got to keep her safe. And this is the sort of thing that Jesus is experiencing right now. And so what is he going to say to his disciples before he goes up to heaven forever? So let's go ahead and read this. So verse 16, then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. It's kind of weird. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." Verse 19, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age." I'm going to repeat verse 19. "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey." Therefore go and make disciples of all nations. So what is he saying to his disciples here? I mean, what is this? It's a job description is what it is. And what does disciple mean? I mean, it's not a fancy word for these specific 11 people that are on the mountain with Jesus. Disciple simply means student. So when he gives that job description to his disciples, it's not just to the 11 people there, it's to all of us. It's to every single one of us, it's to me and to all of you and to all Christians. That's our job description. That's the last thing he said before he left earth. To him, that was the most important thing of all. Are you fulfilling Jesus' job description? There's a preacher by the name of Ray Pritchard. He wrote an article, and it's called "You Will Be My Witnesses, God's Job Description for Every Christian." This, "You will be my witnesses, God's job description for every Christian." And in the article, Ray talks about a preacher, a pastor that poured into him as he was growing up. And this pastor asked Ray a question. And when I read this question, it floored me. It absolutely floored me. And the question is this: have you ever wondered why, when God saved you, have you ever wondered why, when God saved you, he left you here on earth? I mean, wouldn't it be a lot easier is if when you decided to follow Jesus, God's like, "All right, sweet, come up out into heaven. You're all done." Wouldn't it be a lot easier? I mean, like you win a baseball game or a football game, and it's over, right? No. That's not how he works, though. He left us here on earth. But why? Why did he do that? It's the Great Commission is the reason why he did that. So I have to say, as I wrap up this sermon, I feel kind of bad right now. Number one, I feel bad because I feel like I'm kind of like talking at you, and kind of barking at you. I'm not. I'm frustrated. I have a passion for this, and I'm frustrated because I don't do it myself. I am not good at fulfilling God's job description. And I honestly think, and I know some of you do a great job at this, but as Christians, we're not good at this. We're really bad. And so I seriously, I urge everybody here to start doing this. Like this is a challenge. We all got to do this. We got to talk about Jesus to people. It's hard, but that's what we're supposed to do. The second reason why I'm a little, I feel kind of bad right now is because the initial story I told you about Danny and Michelle, kind of a lie. I mean, it's not a lie. It's a true story, but the names are different. And anyway, so Danny Anderson, the kid who flipped his tractor, his name's not Danny Anderson. His real name is Jason Peterson. I didn't flip a tractor, though. I grew up outside of D.C. I was in downtown Georgetown when I was 21 years old and got pretty much as drunk as you possibly can get, and I drove home. And I flipped my car somewhere between 3 to 5 times. Ambulance didn't come to get me. A helicopter had to come and get me. I did have 6 doctors work on me. 5 or 6, I'm not sure. I do have memory problems, so if I forget your name, I'm sorry. But I'll never forget the name of that doctor that had the conversation with me in that hospital room. Dr. Golikovsky. I did meet a Michelle, Leah Michelle Peterson. She didn't have a horse, though. She had a cat. She worked at a vet clinic. She worked at a vet clinic, and a kitten came in, and it was dying. And she, like, single-handedly nursed that kitten back to health. And it lived for 30 or 40 days. She remembers the exact number. I can't remember, but then it died. And when that kitten died, she was devastated. And she wanted to go to church. And there was a neighbor named Leslie that we knew. There weren't 2 preachers at this church. There were 3. But one of them was Dan Smith. And there was a small group that Leah dragged me to. And there was a leader named Pat Ferguson who was amazing. Like, he single-handedly thought it was his job, or he thought it was his job to single-handedly, like, shepherd people who didn't know God and teach them about God. And he went, like, a level deeper, right? He learned who I was, and he knew that I was the type of guy who needed hard evidence to believe in Jesus. That's just how I am. And so he was the guy who put the case for Christ in my hand. And through reading that is what got me over that hump to get baptized. So we're going to watch a video right now of some baptisms, but before I close, I just want to say, like, God gives us gifts at times, right? And one of the greatest gifts that he can give you is when you're a part of somebody's story, getting them into the water to be baptized. When you see that baptism, the joy that fills your body, it's like physical joy. It's crazy. It's amazing. Nothing like it on earth. So again, I urge you to be part of people's stories on their way to getting baptized. And I don't know the story behind these baptisms, but I'm sure a lot of people played a lot of hands in that. So let's go ahead and check out this video.